whispered to her, I was like, can you still add onions to my thing? And she whispered back to me, don't worry, I just cut them really thin and I've been cooking with them since I've taken over. Merry meet and welcome. I'm Taylor, and today we're going to be taking on Chandler's grilled cheese, very famous for him not celebrating Thanksgiving. Hero? No. Sorry. Anyways, so he doesn't celebrate it for actually much more selfish reasons and just bad memories. There's 1,000 different reasons why Thanksgiving is problematic, but we're not going to go into that. We're here for the meals, and that's it. Because you can really eat this food anytime. Wow, a lot of disclaimer up front. Hope you guys are just having a good, fun day. Let's go ahead and get into it. So we're going to be making the tomato jam, and this is actually called for in a lot of different recipes, but it's just noted here, so we are going to put it here, and sometimes this video will get referenced later on too. So keep that tomato jam in mind. And then for the grilled cheese, so we do have our Sims video. It'll be linked below where we made our own grilled cheese. We definitely are just going to be using sliced cheese for this one because that's honestly what her recipe calls for. So like, why not lean into it? Why make our lives harder? With that, let's go ahead and jump into it. Merry meet again. So we're gonna get started with that tomato jam. It's honestly, this is gonna be a step that you want to do depending on your energy levels, either like in the morning, because it's a 5-hour process according to this recipe, or you can do it on another day and then just add this to your grilled cheese. So this is just super fancy for Chandler. You know, he's got to fancy it up if he's gonna be celebrating a holiday for it, even if it is just a grilled cheese. So let's get started with our tomato jam. And we have our pot here. We're only doing half because it's just me, so we don't need to make 6 whole sandwiches. With that being said, we're going to be using, let's go ahead and put our tablespoon of oil here at the bottom. We don't really need to measure it, just put some there. I'm going to go ahead and put my onion. It's a 1/2 cup of sliced onion. And then I have some 1/2 teaspoon of grated ginger. If you don't like ginger, you can just use the spice since it's only 1/2 teaspoon. Let's be real. I have a tablespoon of cumin. And I think if you don't have cumin, you probably could substitute with taco seasoning. And then we also have 1/2 of lemon zest, a whole 1/2 of a lemon. And then with that, we have the lemon juice of that lemon. We're still half. We have 1/2 cup of brown sugar to help sweeten it. And then of course, we have our tomatoes. This is going to be 1 pound of cherry tomatoes. Here's kind of what it looks like. As you can tell, it's getting all hot and bothered in there. I did not plan out a spoon, so this is the one I'm grabbing. Yeah, I'm gonna mix this, keep in here. Everything's getting hot. It's on medium-high heat. At any point does she mention busting these. She just says to bring it to a boil and let it be there for an hour. It's at a boil. So I'm gonna set this off to the side and play around with it. Yeah, I think she meant that you do need to crush these, but since it's so hot, I'm gonna turn this down to low because when you wanna crush tomatoes, it's so much easier after they do have a chance to soften. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just getting these all coated. I'm trying to make sure that the bottom at any point does not get, burned on the bottom. And this really is a jam, so like you're able to do whatever you want and feel comfortable with, as well as with the feelings. Again, this really feels like more of an optional step if you're just trying to make yourself a vegan grilled cheese. We're just trying to make this a little bit extra. So yeah, I don't see how based off her recipe this is supposed to get to a boil without busting up the tomatoes. So that's what I'm going to do. I don't have a smasher, which you would think I would because of like mashed potatoes and stuff like that, but like I don't live and die by mashed potatoes. And if you boil them long enough, you can just whisk them. And if you don't whisk them for too long, or if you use a spoon or a spatula, that's how you can still get lumps if you want lumps. Sorry, I think that probably, I haven't, I feel like that needs to be a recipe in here, is potatoes 3 ways. Oh my gosh, okay, it is true. So one time, friends and I, we were going to be doing Thanksgiving, and I was in charge of potatoes 3 ways, and so it was just really fun because it's like super easy on how to do them, because you got your tater tots, you got your mashed potatoes with lumps, and then you have your mashed potatoes without lumps. So yeah, we did that one year as a potluck. It was so much fun. Yeah, I'm really not liking this spoon for this, so that is fun for me. Because I really like to be low stress. Okay, I'm gonna take a fork because I don't have anything bigger. Okay, so I'm gonna try and use this fork to pierce these and squish them against the side, and that is working fantastically. See, and then that's exactly, I don't know if you just saw, that's exactly why it is important to write your recipes as if it is the scientific method, as if it is an idiot who is following them, because if they don't know how to follow the recipe and they have to figure out something for themselves and they aren't confident in it, they may not do that, and then it ends up poorly. I think that's actually what happens with a lot of people, and they're like, I can't even follow a recipe. They're following poorly written recipes where there's a lot of assumption from the person being like, well, of course the tomatoes aren't just gonna like be instantly perfect and everything, but it's like, I wish she would have said like how she breaks down her tomatoes, because it really is nowhere in the recipe. And from what I know, there is no way to just have them completely simmer down. But maybe that's because I'm impatient. Maybe, I don't know. But that also feels just crazy to let it boil and then simmer for an hour with it just being liquid and the tomatoes not being pushed. So, I've made pretty good progress. You can kind of see. Now that we're getting towards the center, it's a little bit harder. Ooh. And the tomatoes are hot, so sometimes they do like pop up and hit me, and so that's not as fun. Oh, sorry. I'm like trying to use my elbow to anchor the handle. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. We're just squishing them to where we get to this, and then we're gonna let it bring to a boil and let it simmer for an hour to thicken up. I originally was going to try to have it at a higher angle so that you guys could just see this fully. That's a harder setup to do, and I was like, oh, this will be easy, we'll just do that. And then I realized, like, after starting, I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to squish these tomatoes, aren't I? Read your recipes, folks. Ooh. Bit of an arm workout. Oh my gosh, it is so hot. I need to turn on my AC. I was, ah! So be very careful, because this is hot tomato juice coming at you. But anyways, it is so hot right now. But I wanted to keep the AC off so that you guys don't hear it, because it's so loud. My AC is just like 1. It doesn't have anything else. Okay, so here's the thing. I just want to make sure that I just want to make sure that these are all busted open, essentially. Oh, it's like, I want to focus, and then the steam rises up. So, there we go. So they all look very busted, and now I'm going to let it simmer at this, and they're going to kind of keep this, although it's going to lessen. So they'll probably be, actually, this is probably how it's going to look towards the end. But all of them will, because you can really pick out the tomatoes right now, so that it'll come together. So I'll see you in an hour as we let this simmer. Again, because I'm on a gas stove, you can already see it's bubbling, so we're just going to go ahead and let it sit. There we meet again. So as you can see, this really got reduced down. This was maybe about 50 minutes. So, because I'm hoping that liquid will thicken up a little bit more there. I did forget to tell you, because I was so anxious about the tomatoes, to add, to add half a cup of water. And so that also is kind of there. So I'm hoping this will thicken up even more, because this definitely did thicken up. But I want to maintain some quantity. Like, I don't want it to just cook down to this, because then it feels more like a sauce and less like a jam. But anyways, because normally with like jelly jams, you're like, okay, let me test this out by, using multiple hands at once, by seeing if on the back of the spoon, if the jelly like closes that hole. And so it doesn't do that, so that's kind of the test we're using here. Also a good way to taste test. And honestly, with the cumin, because it was smelling so strong, I did not know how this would taste, but this actually tastes so good. Between the lemon and the ginger, I did kind of add more ginger because I love it. It is, what's the word? It's very well balanced, honestly. And so you kind of don't have that acidity that you normally get with like tomatoes and such, and I was kind of afraid of that. So it really doesn't feel like you're biting into a tomato. It's also the brown sugar with that sweetness. It really helped balance out everything. So, yeah, meanwhile, my mind was just like, did I use the right amount of sugar? Because I was like, maybe this is too sweet. No, I did. Anyways, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead, put this in our little jar over here, and then we're going to set it aside to cool to room temperature, exactly how the jar looks now with the lid like that. If you have cats or like animals who jump up and stuff and you're like, I don't really have a place to put a jar where I can leave it unattended for a few hours, I always use my microwave as kind of like a holding space. So that's always what I recommend. But with that, I'll go ahead, put this in the jar. We'll let it get to room temperature for about 2 to 4 hours. And then you have to refrigerate it for 4 more hours. So yeah, and then when that time comes is when you actually screw on the lid as well. So that is also why for this recipe, I actually miscounted. I didn't realize that there were 2 4 hours in there. So this is for sure a day ahead. You don't want to do this on the same day. If you're like, oh, maybe I want to try doing this, I totally recommend doing the tomato jam on a day when like you are able to be home and for the first like 4 hours, and then but also that you aren't wanting the grilled cheese as soon as you're done with it, because unfortunately I don't think the reward payoff is as big if you are doing it all in one day like I am, because this now is like, instead of it being for lunch like I thought, it's going to be for sure for dinner, which is not a problem, but it kind of reminds me of a much more intense way of like, do you remember or have you ever been had a family member where they're like, oh yeah, I'll just put it all in the crock pot and leave it on for like the whole 8 hours and let it slow cook and roast? Like, that's what this reminds me of. So it does make sense because it's jam, and so maybe that's where my expectations were, but my argument for that is make it a separate recipe in the book, especially since this actually goes along with 2 other recipes, which is 1 more than the hand spread, which is a staple. So anyways, it's just interesting. And that's really all I can say about it. I'm trying to have fun. I am not in the best mental place, I will be honest. So yeah, so teach their own. Let's put this in the jar, put it in, get it to room temperature, and then we'll put it in the fridge. I'm just not going to show you all those steps, so next time we talk will be when we're working on the actual grilled cheese elements. And we'll see you then. Merry meet again. So here we are to finally put together our grilled cheese, or Chandler's grilled cheese sandwich. And here is part of our, oh, of course it won't focus. Here is part of our tomato jam. We'll see a little bit more in action a little bit later, but as you can tell, it is super jammy now. It is not any of that thinness and moves just like jam. So, mission accomplished. To get started for this recipe, she does call for some more onions, so we're going to use another 1 or 2 tablespoons of sliced onions, and we're going to caramelize them. So something fancy about caramelizing, it typically just means that you are adding heat to something, and caramelizing it, I really wonder, I should look into this, because I know you make caramel by heating up sugar, so it could just be from that term. But yeah, anyway, sorry, let's put some oil down on here and get this going. But anyways, and then yeah, just 1 to 2 tablespoons. I love onions. And you know what's funny? So I grew up with my family being like, no onions ever. To the point to where my sister, when she was like the family cook and whatnot, and was making meals, I had whispered to her, I was like, can you still add onions to my thing? And she whispered back to me, don't worry, I just cut them really thin and I've been cooking with them since I've taken over the kitchen. So, and she's like, and it's hilarious because the person who's the loudest about not wanting onions is also the person who's like, it's so much better. What did you do to change the recipe? Onions. It's shocking. So if you don't like onions, just cut them really thin and try them out. It is so amazing. Honestly, actually, the first time I ever had onions was on a burger. Like, because a lot of times with parenting, like, your kids eat what you eat. And so the first time I ever had it was actually on a burger when my babysitter, it was like her kid's party, and like we all went to a McDonald's, and like this this kind of babysitter was the kind who's just like, you're gonna get what you like and you're gonna like it. So like, didn't ask anything. I didn't like pickles or onions at that time, and I ate it, and it was pretty good. It was decent. I didn't like the pickles, but I took off the onion, or I took those off because I knew I didn't like those, and I had the rest, and it was so good. It's because McDonald's on their McDoubles or McSingles, I don't know, what are the single ones called? Cheeseburgers? They do chopped onions, and that was just like life changing for me. Because then I like started having chopped onions on my burgers. My family would be like, roll their eyes. And then later in life, I went to In-N-Out, another burger store. They use like a whole slice of onion, not like how these are sliced, but like literally if you were just chopping up an onion, just like a whole layer of it. Well, that's not even a good term for saying layer, because layers are technically how it falls apart. Anyways, I'm talking a lot. That's the show. Anyways, I was starving though, and I didn't know it came with onions like that. And when I bit into it, it was so good. And so for a long time, I was like, well, I might have just been starving. And yeah, and I know these stories are funny because like, I obviously don't eat burgers now unless they're Impossible or Beyond or veggie, whatever. You get it. So it's just really, it's funny how my relation to onions, one of the like best vegetables ever, didn't come about in like soups or French cuisine, came out through burgers, because you really can taste an onion on a burger. And then as you get more associated with it, you kind of just develop that. And I think that goes a lot with other things. And I mentioned tomatoes. When I was younger, I was just like against tomatoes. I'm not really sure why. I think I just had a bad tomato and was like, I know what I like. But then later, I probably put too much oil, so these might get, might just soak up this oil rather than getting like that nice like caramel brown caramelization where it browns up and becomes a little bit more translucent. But it is what it is. It'll still have some good flavor. We're still firing it up. It just might not get that crispiness that you normally want with those. But it is what it is. Anyways, thank you for being here for story time. So the tomatoes though, it actually was when I was working at Waffle House, and I was just like, it looks so good. And I used to just have BLs, just bacon and lettuce, when I was eating those kind of sandwiches. And then I was just like, one day I just had it, and then I actually got like obsessed with tomato sandwiches themselves, having them especially with like garlic salt and mayo on them. And then I like eggs were like, ugh. The one thing in my life that like I used to eat consistently was eggs. That was probably really hard on me when I couldn't eat them, actually. So hard that like just egg, it hadn't gotten as popular as it is now, but like that was a life-saving force for me, honestly, to be able to have that. Anyways, food is important. And sometimes we need to have some sort of stability. When I got sick, the doctor was just like, you need to cut out like everything you normally eat, and like she wanted me to also cut out gluten, and I was like, all right. And just to be cautious, because we weren't sure about if my family had thyroid issues, we were sure about all the other stuff, and I was just like, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not gonna do that, because that's a little bit much. Like, I do love rice, but like that's too much change, because like I'm so simple in the morning, like just toast, eggs and whatnot, and coffee, good to go. So like I really had to like change, well, not too much because it's just egg, but yeah. Anyways, rambling. So yeah, these are getting a little bit more cooked. It's actually, so I've talked to you guys about how this is, and we're actually going to be using this for the grilled cheese right after, so I don't want it to get too hot. So I'm going to turn it on to low, but I'm surprised these took so long. Okay, I lied, because I don't want this to slowly heat up and then me not be able to cool it down. So I'm actually going to go ahead and turn it up to a little bit more medium high versus just medium, or medium low, to just get a little bit more char on these guys. Honestly, like, these look perfectly fine. Another, like, a lot of this sandwich is just like, how can I make a grilled cheese more fancy, honestly? And you'll even see with the bread. So yeah, this is one way, adding caramelized onions, something else. So we're doing the tomato jam, which I think is next level fancy. Other people, you know, would maybe just add tomato slices. Okay, so I like how those look, especially because the reality is I'm actually not taking them off the stove because we're cooking everything right here. So I'm actually just going to move these over to the side. If you're like, don't like oil, and you can put them off to the side on like a little like reusable paper towel or napkin, whatever you have. I'm gonna put this back down to low so that we can really make sure that we get our bread toasted and the cheese melty. And then what we're going to be using is sourdough bread. I have it pre-buttered. I've shared some other buttering tips. Ooh, it's really sticking. So yeah, that's crazy. That doesn't normally happen. So that's exciting for me. So I'm gonna add some more oil to this. I just don't still have the butter stick out. That was a lot of oil, but that's okay. So yeah, we'll throw some oil up there, keep that nice and lubricated. So sometimes it's just working with your stove, working with your materials. We may have to change out of this, but hopefully I just picked up some of the gunk that was like making it stick down. I did clean this, but you never know. And then our second piece. And then we're going to go ahead, sorry if you heard that, and add our tomato jam onto one of these slices. So yeah, definitely worth it to make sure that it completely has its full resting time to cool down, because it does have this really beautiful consistency now. And then on top of that, we're going to add our caramelized onions. You know, I always think this is a center. Oh, yes, pretty good. I was like, I didn't even check. Sorry if you can hear my cat in the background. And then because I don't like to waste things, we're just gonna add this bread into the middle of our sandwich that we scraped off. And then what we're going to be using, of course it's so difficult to see. Here we go. We're going to be using the BioLife Just Like American Sandwich Slices cheddar. So if you've seen our previous grilled cheese video, we made our own cheddar, and so that's why we're doing it a little bit this way instead. And then for her recipe, it actually says to put both slices of cheese on this side. I totally was going to do an experiment to put half of cheese on here to really see how it worked out, and that isn't really a complete option. Am I forcing it? 100%. So literally what I'm doing is I'm trying to move this tomato jam to where I can put this cheese a little bit more on the bottom, because I feel like that's normally what you would do, is put cheese on both sides, and then that way we'll cut it in half and take a bite out of both sides and see if her way of just putting it all on one side is better, or if it's better to sandwich them. But you also only need one slice if you only have one slice. That is another great way about actually having this tomato jam. It does help bulk up a sandwich if you don't have that much to put in the center. Same thing with the caramelized onions. But pretty easy peasy. As I was saying, I'll have the video link below, but for the Sims grilled cheese, we made our own cheddar cheese, and that was really fun and exciting. I also shared how to maybe butter your bread if you're using cold butter. The other thing I will share about using cold butter if you're buttering your bread is, as soon as you know you're going to need it, set it out and just allow it to have that little bit of time no matter what, and then just be very gentle with it. So a lot of times you like put a whole bunch of butter on one thing and then you put a lot of pressure on the bread. You want to do like very feather-like tests, as if you're painting on it, to be honest, because here's the reality. As you go through it, it's going to heat up because it's not all together on that block. So it's going to become a lot smoother. You just have to sometimes be a bit patient. So if you're not patient enough to wait for it to soften up in room temperature, just be a little gentle and that should do the trick. Also helps bring a little bit more peace, especially if you're like super anxious or anything, depending on how you're coming into your kitchen. Alright, I did turn it down to low, but it is already super crusty, so we're going to go ahead and flip this cheese one because it's going to be easier to stick. onto this one. Oh, there we go. And then I'm actually going to turn it off again for me because it's going to keep cooking because this is hot, and it's just, I just want it to get a little bit more melty. And so even though I don't necessarily have the cheese part of it on it, I'm hoping that this heat will still help it come through and then just really melt this sandwich together. And then I'll see you for the taste test. Merry meet and welcome again. So here we are after our taste test. As you can see, it took quite a few bites. So here are our final thoughts. It is very good. Definitely a very fancy sandwich if you are trying to do Thanksgiving on a budget, especially, or if you don't like to celebrate that holiday, which is totally reasonable. We're really more here for the tradition of celebrating with food. I personally celebrate more of a Thanksgiving near Mabon, so because that actually is a natural time of year to give thanks for what you have, because you're in the middle of abundance typically during that time, because it's the second harvest. Anyways, little fun tidbit there, because I know it gets weird around these kind of holidays, so clearly my mind is on something. Anyways, the sandwich is so good, I will say. So for the half that has the just cheese on one side, the tomato jam is good, but it takes over the sandwich, and so you kind of lose that grilled cheesiness. It definitely feels more like a tomato sandwich. That might be partially due to the cheese, because she just says to use like your favorite sliced cheese. And so, but typically with vegan cheese, and this one especially, and I've had this kind of cheese on some other sandwiches and whatnot, like you saw the whole pack is pretty empty. The thing about it though is like it's typically a very strong cheddar flavor, so it's interesting that it's not really coming through, but it's not bad. And it also just might be that like I added more jam than is typically needed, but she just said add a generous amount, and I feel like I did that. Either way, it's still good. On the other side though, where you actually have cheese on both sides, you do get more of that cheese flavor. So if you are wanting it to be more of a grilled cheese, I definitely would recommend putting cheese on both sides and then layering in your jam and onions. But yeah, that's going to be Chandler's grilled cheese, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.